What's up, everybody? I hope you enjoyed the last video, if you watched it, and this is the second video of this series of some ideas around sex education that I wanted to distill and then instill. So what do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about self-pleasure today. Self-pleasure. So, self-pleasure, it's kind of funny. There's a friend of mine. He's a good friend, and he asked a while ago. I was going to have a self pleasure session, and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him that. And he's like, "Oh, is that what they're calling masturbating these days?" I remember he said that, and I thought it was funny. I guess the reason I think it's funny is because so self pleasure to me is a really important practice. I do it every day, and I guess the reason that joke was funny is because people can take it too seriously too. Just like people can take anything too seriously. Like when you see people in meditation communities, I don't know, they get really what's the word, hoity-toity about it, or people in like art communities get really hoity-toity about their art, and I think people in like tantric and sacred sexual communities can get really hoity-toity about self-pleasuring, where it's like it's not masturbating, it's self-pleasuring. Um, so I guess I want to make that disclaimer that like I have an aversion to hoity-toityness, and I try not to be hoity-toity. Like I try to see that in myself as best I can, and I'm always happy to be called out for being hoity-toity because that's why feedback's important. Because we can't see the world perfectly, and so getting feedback from other people helps. And that to say, I'm always open to feedback, as long as it's delivered like with good intent. So self-pleasure. I would describe self pleasure um, as taking intentional time for yourself in order to explore your experience of pleasure. I think that's the most simple definition. And that could look a lot of different ways. It could look like, I mean, honestly, if you use the definition that's that broad, it could look like taking time to take a bath. It could look like taking time to eat chocolate or go for a walk or, you know, whatever the thing is. Things that give us pleasure. And that's connected to like a greater paradigm where it's so hard to go out of, at least I've found in my experience, it's taken a lot of practice for me to go out of my way to give pleasure to myself. Whereas, like, if I have a partner, oh, of course I'll draw her a bath. But to find the time for me to draw myself a bath, that's really hard. And it takes practice to receive pleasure from oneself. And I do think that there is an important, I don't know what to call it, but like part of our psyche that allows us to receive. So there's so many ways to look at this, but like, let's say somebody gives you a compliment. You know what it's like when you can't receive it. You're just like, thanks. You say, thanks. Or you say, your shirt looks nice. You don't even say thank you. You just immediately give another compliment where like their compliment comes in and like bounces right off you. But how good does it feel when you give a compliment to a person and they receive it? So you say like, man, your eyes really like bring out your fierceness, and I find it to be really impactful. And you say that to a person, and you feel them like take it in. And they're like, thank you. Like it feels nice to have compliments received, and that's because most people can't receive very well. Anyway, so the idea that I want to propose here is that the same like muscle that's involved in receiving a compliment is an analogous muscle to receiving all kinds of other things, like a gift. If somebody gives me a gift, can I receive it graciously? And the reason I want to tie this into self-pleasure is because self-pleasure is the act of giving yourself a gift of pleasure. And with any gift exchange, there's a giver and there's a receiver. So I'm giving myself a gift, and then I'm also putting myself to task to receive the gift. And I think that like at least one lens is that as we continue to expand our muscle that allows us to receive, we can receive more from ourselves, we can receive more from our like friends and loved ones, and we can receive more from life. Because think about it, when you're receiving, it means you're letting something in. You're letting the compliment in, or you're letting the love in, or you're letting the gift in, and we're constantly in relationship with life, with whatever this thing life is. And there's so much to experience in life. Like I get riled up even thinking about it, because there is literally an infinite amount to experience in life, an infinite amount of breadth, but also an infinite amount of depth. And the more I find in my experience that I'm able to receive in general, I'm able to open up and receive life more. And when I receive life more, life like comes through me deeper, and it moves through me deeper. And what that ends up meaning for me is like I feel more in touch with my own sense of purpose. Or as Michael Mead, who's a mythologist, he uses the word genius to describe like within each person there's this innate set of qualities that make them unique, and they have this unique set of gifts to give the world, and a unique set of being in the world, a unique way of impacting the world. And I find that the deeper my relationship with life is, and the deeper I can let life into me, the more in touch I am with my own sense of genius. Okay, so that's a pitch for receiving. And that's a pitch for you can receive from self-pleasure. Now back to self-pleasure. When I'm talking about it here, though, like I said, there's a lot of types of self-pleasure. I want to talk about self-pleasure specifically around self-genital massage. AKA like I'll just say intentional masturbating, or like conscious masturbating. It's kind of a cool term, conscious masturbating, because most people masturbate so unconsciously. Like for so many people, I know it's different with people who are traditionally raised as men versus who are traditionally raised as women. And I'm trying to be careful about my language there, because I recognize the complexity of gender and that there are some people who don't fall on the binary. That's an exploration of my own as well. And I'm not perfect with my language on it. But anyways, so masturbating, dude, yeah, like so many people's relationship with masturbation is they're not even present for it. It's like if I touch, speaking as a guy, like if I touch my dick while looking at this screen, I'll get this like pop of pleasure, and then that's it. And it takes a lot of time, and there's like, it's like I'm a vacant ghost while it's happening. Like, dude, think about like if you could make eye contact with people when they're masturbating to porn. Like if you were on the other side of the screen and you could look at them, it would probably be horrifying. You're probably just like looking at like the most like entranced vacant, like there's nobody even present there, just like, oh, let's go, let's go, let's go. Um, yeah, and so, gosh, so many people have such like challenging relationships with masturbating too. Of like, so many people have stories of, gosh, getting caught masturbating when they're young, or being afraid of getting caught masturbating, like it was a bad thing to masturbate, a bad thing to pleasure yourself, or like getting caught watching porn. So much fear around porn. And so, anyways, the idea that I'm trying to convey here is that there's so much collective wounding around masturbation. Like, it's not entrained in us to have a healthy relationship with masturbation. It's entrained in us as something that we need to hide, and it's entrained in us as also something that, like, so in that we need to hide, that there is like inherent shame around it, but also it's so linked with pornography, at least in our culture, that like most many people I know, at least guys, like I know it's different for guys than for people raised as women, but at least for guys that I know, there's so many people who like can't even masturbate without a screen. Like they can't get hard without a screen, or they can't orgasm without a screen. And that's why there's a whole movement online called NoFap, which is interesting because NoFap is a movement that's like diagnosed that there is a problem, that porn addiction is a real thing, or masturbation addiction is a real thing, that people will run from their problems and they will hide in this like slot of dopamine and pleasure. And so anyway, so NoFap is a movement where it's like, okay, let's just completely abstain from that and not masturbate at all. And I think that's a proper diagnosis of what's happening, but I don't think it's the final solution. And okay, let me see if there's anything I want to say before getting into specifics. Okay, the last thing I'll say about, actually no, let's get into specifics. So self-pleasuring, the way I'm speaking about it, conscious masturbation. Man, it is so I have a self-pleasure practice I do every morning, 25 minutes for usually 5 days a week. And I've been doing that for like a year and a half, maybe more. And I want to give a shout out to Tyron Mowbray. That's a men's coach I worked with in a men's sexual empowerment circle. And he turned me on to self-pleasure in the first place, and like right when I found the habit, it just immediately stuck for me. I just have done it every morning since the day I learned it, pretty much. And okay, so what does it look like to self-pleasure? I guess I would say like, well, it can look a lot of different ways, but for me, for me, it's essentially just I'll lie down, and ideally, like it'd be nice to make the space nice, right? To like light a candle, or I don't always use music. I don't usually, but sometimes I do. But play nice music, nice lighting, right? That's nice to do. I don't always do that, but it's a nice touch, right? Because like you're creating a scene for yourself. You're making the act into a sacred act. Um, Anyways, but I'll lie down and I'll just start touching myself. And usually I always use lotion, and usually I'll just touch my cock, but sometimes I'll, you know, rub my body, because this feels good too, and just like explore what feels good on my body, or like my nipples. I have sensitive nipples, so like that can feel really good. And like my taint. There's just a lot of areas of pleasure to explore in the body that don't always or usually get attention. But what I find most interesting is there's a space right before orgasming. There's a space right before orgasming. So usually when you're masturbating, pleasure builds, 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 and then there's like this space of like orgasm. Oh, we're past the um, metaphor lost. I lost the metaphor, but we're past the thing, and like, okay, now we're orgasming. Okay, so what is most interesting to me is you build pleasure, build pleasure, build pleasure, but like right at this space, you can hang out there. You can hang out on that cusp right before orgasming, and while you're in that space, dude, let me tell you, it's fucking interesting. Um, okay, so let me speak to this on a couple of different perspectives. I'll start with the most basic of like, if you're spending time in your sexual body and in your arousal every day, you just start to get to know your sexuality better. You start to get to know like what it feels like sexually better. You start to get to know what it's like when you're closer to orgasm. Like there, because there's this whole like complex, nuanced internal experience happening when we're experiencing pleasure and experiencing orgasm. And when you practice it slowly, you can like dilate it and really see what's in there. Like I would say some practical benefits. I don't use it for these reasons, but like I know a lot of tantric coaches and tantric teachers. Um, I mean, like for women who it's difficult to experience orgasm, like there's what better can you do than explore your body? Or for male-bodied folks, I mean, I know a lot of tantric coaches will say it can help with people who have trouble being hard, or have trouble staying, keeping erect, or just like any. I think it's probably useful for any challenge you have with your penis. Um, that said, that's actually not why I use it. I just use it because it's an interesting space to be in, and it's a space where I learn about myself. So I want to give a couple practices that you can do. So if you can get yourself into this space of being on the cusp of orgasm. Okay, first one is fantasy. I'm going to do a separate video on fantasy, going deeper into it, because there's so much rich territory in there. But I'll just keep it simple here. I like fantasy. I think fantasy is very useful. I think it's very powerful. I learn a lot about myself based on the fantasies I generate. I've read books, or I shouldn't say books, I've read essays on how fantasy is like bad, I guess. And I can see that there's a case to where like fantasy is a gateway into our wounds. But I'll just state outright, like, my perspective is that when used, as with like almost anything, when used intentionally and consciously and with care, I think fantasy is fucking awesome, and you can learn a lot about yourself through it. So anyways, being on the cusp of pleasure, like what happens if you let a fantasy emerge? And so like oftentimes people will have a fantasy that emerges, and then they'll use their fantasy to get like internally get off, and then once they orgasm, like they get to the best part of the fantasy and they orgasm, and they just keep running through that. That's fine. I do that too. But if you're hanging out in this space before orgasm and you're sitting in a fantasy, what can actually happen is the fantasy can develop further than it's ever been. It's like usually the fantasy goes from here to here, but if you sit in it longer, there is a plot that has not been unveiled yet, and you can unveil that plot. And it's not like I mean, yes, you're making it up, but when you're in this like really aroused state, it just kind of happens. And to me, that is so informative of like, holy shit, what is this plot of erotic imagination that just squirted out of me, so to speak? There's a lot to learn about myself from that. I'll get more into that in a different video. But that's one practice you can do, is just like practice fantasizing, develop fantasies, create new fantasies, new plots, new characters, new dynamics, or take old dynamics and take them further. A second thing you can do when you're hanging out in that pre-orgasm space is, yeah, I'll talk about this one. Expression. It's a space where you can practice expressing pleasure. So, for a lot of people, I know not for everyone, but for a lot of people, there is shame or blockages around expressing pleasure. So, like, here's an example. Let's say you and I are hanging out, and let's say you're at like a dinner party with a bunch of friends, and you're put on the spot, and they're like, hey, Chris, let's say your name's Chris. They're like, hey, Chris, can you sing that funny song that you sang the other day? And you're put on the spot, you're like, oh shit, I have to sing in front of everyone. Or if they're like, hey, Chris, do a goofy dance. And you're like, oh shit, I have to do a goofy dance in front of everyone. Like, a lot of people will freeze. There's this shame of like, can I really like do a goofy dance and express myself in front of all these people? Ooh, I can't do that. I'm afraid of my expression because I have shame around it, and I'm afraid of being seen in it. Okay, so take that. I'm sure we can all relate to that, right? Like, it's hard to just like dance on the spot unless you have practiced dancing a lot. So take that principle and apply it to pleasure. Can you express pleasure shamelessly? Do you know what your voice sounds like when you're in pleasure? Do you know what your body wants to do? How well do you know your expression of pleasure? Probably a lot of people don't know their expression of pleasure, but this is a space to practice it. It's the equivalent of like, if you want to become a better dancer or like get better rhythm, or had to fling this bag out of the way. If you want to become a better dancer or get better rhythm or become more shameless with your movement, there's a lot of ways to practice, but one way, people can all dance in the room by themselves and like learn how their body wants to move, right? Same thing. You can be in pleasure by yourself and you can feel like, oh, so sound, breath, movement. Well, let's start with breath. Breath, sound, movement. So breath, like if you're on this cusp of pleasure, what is it like to breathe from a place of pleasure? Because when you're in that pre-orgasm state, let me tell you, you're like, there's no self-consciousness. The sensation of pleasure is so strong and overwhelming, it's like your mind is out the window. And so if your mind's out the window, you have access to expressing in a pureness and a rawness that you don't always have. So breath, what's it like to breathe with pleasure? And then sound, what's it like to vocalize pleasure? And then movement, what's your body want to do when you're feeling pleasure? Right? So like you can cultivate these things. And then if you want to take that to the next level, you can practice that with a partner. Either you and your partner are making love and you have the emphasis on expressing your pleasure as like big as you can, or maybe you're masturbating alongside your partner, you're masturbating together, you're both expressing your pleasure. Cool. A third thing that you can do while self-pleasuring. Do I want to go into this? Okay. I'll introduce one more framework. Oh gosh, there's a lot. Okay, I'll introduce one more framework. But one thing I'll say about the pleasure is, about any of this is this is my way of learning, I guess. I like when people give me tools, like basics, and then I can play with the basics and then play with them and do my own thing with them, right? So like, I do a lot of stuff with pleasure, but like so chakras are a framework that I find useful, and I'll do exactly what I was saying, express my pleasure, but I'll go through each chakra and express it. And I notice that like different noises come out of different chakras and emotions tend to get released, because again, once that sexual channel is open and the energy is flowing through, it feels like the lid is off this whole floodgate, and once like this water of pleasure and sexual energy is gushing through, all of the other crusted anger or grief or sadness or shit on the outer rim of the tunnel is just blasted through with it. And in my experience, each chakra can hold different stuckness of energy or emotion. And if you don't like the chakra framework, that's fine. That doesn't matter. You can either treat it as just like a lens, or you can just say, maybe you can acknowledge that different parts of your body feel different, and that you feel emotions in different parts of your body, right? So if you're afraid, or like let's say you're afraid to speak up, right? That feels different than if you are angry at your mom and yelling at her, right? That feels different in your body. Those things are happening in different spaces. So if you can at least acknowledge that, you don't have to use the chakra framework. You can just play with different parts of your body. That's fine. But anyways, the point I'm making is you can play with these tools I'm giving you. So the tool of just pleasure expression, I play with that with my chakras. I'll go through each chakra and it feels like I'm cleansing them out. It feels so good and so much emotion comes out. Anyways, the last framework that I want to give you is around clenchedness versus relaxation. So when you're on that cusp of orgasm, like right before the orgasm, just notice. You can either be like pushing for it, and that's not bad. Like a lot can come out when you're like, you can feel yourself pushing, or you can be 100% relaxed. If you are 100% relaxed, in my experience, usually when I'm in the pushing, and I do both have different benefits, but if I'm in that like kind of pushing, usually it means I'm faster, like my pace is faster. I'm usually expressing more. My hand is usually stroking faster when I'm in that kind of like pushing space. But if my cock is totally relaxed, and if my perineum is totally relaxed, and my body is totally relaxed, and I'm on that cusp of pleasure and I'm self-pleasuring, usually what it means is my hand is moving so slowly. It's like literally moving that fast or slower. And what that means is it's dilating. Time is dilating. Like anytime you're experiencing time and it's really slow, it means that you are seeing more details of your experience and time is dilating. So for example, I love taking cold baths. And if I take a cold bath for 5 minutes, the reason I love it so much is because cold baths are incredibly painful if you fight it. If you try and resist the cold, a cold bath is fucking terrible. But if you're willing to be in cold water and just like surrender, like you're getting a massage or you're in a deep yoga pose, you just totally surrender. Don't fight the cold. Welcome the cold. Don't react. Just like, ooh. Then all of a sudden time slows down and I can see so much more detail in my experience and it feels blissful. And that's the same thing about, I find when I'm super relaxed and I'm moving my hand really slowly and self-pleasuring, time really slows down. So anyways, those are a couple tools to play with. I could go on more, but I'll just keep it there. That might be a lot already. So self-pleasure, why would you want to self-pleasure? One, it's a great way to learn about your own body. It's a great way to learn about your own sexuality. It's a great way to learn about what you like. It's a great way to unlock your expression of pleasure and sexuality. It's a great way to just be with yourself. It's a great way to experience pleasure. Pleasure is just so healing in and of itself. Like, it feels so fucking good to have your body just filled with pleasure. It's a great way to de-shame pleasure. It's a great way to practice receiving. And it's a great way to just develop a positive relationship with your penis or vagina, whatever your genitalia is. Okay, I actually want to be inclusive here, but I don't know too much about intersex. But whatever, I'll just say, whatever your genitalia is, it's a great way to develop a positive relationship with it. Like, in my perspective, it's important to have a positive relationship with everything in my life. I'm not going to go too into that theory, but, like, I do have a theory about that. But, like, I've got a dick. I want to have a positive relationship with my dick. I want to love my dick. I want to root for my dick. I want to think my dick is the best. I want to care for my dick. I want to be a good friend to my dick. And if I'm sitting there, like, giving my dick an incredible amount of pleasure and attention, and, like, love and support and understanding, it is going to increase the positivity in the relationship I have with my dick. So, that's what I got. Self-pleasure? Cool. And as I said yesterday on the other video too, yeah, feel free to reach out for any reason. If you want to connect because you feel synergy, hit me up. If you want to work together in any capacity, hit me up. And I guess I'll say working together. Yeah, I mean, kind of like what I talked about in the first video, like, if you either want to just improve your sex life, if you want to move along further in your sexual journey, and just, like, progress in your sexual journey, or if you want to dismantle all the conditioning you have around your sexuality to figure out what your truth is in your sexuality, I would love to be a guide and support for any of those ambitions, and we can figure out what that looks like if you're interested. Cool. I will send out another video shortly. Topic is to be determined. All right. Oh, I'm gonna try a spin this time, and I'm gonna close it perfectly. All right. See you guys.